This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Welcome to another episode. I am Anthony Cosenza. And joining me in a much different location than usual is my co-host, John Sheeran. John, you are far south, my friend, working the Senior Bowl with some friends of ours. You've got a roommate that's a buddy of ours as well that you're hanging out with. How's everything going down there in Mobile?
Yeah, it's my third year down here. I basically feel like a resident of Alabama at this point. I know all these. I know these streets as well as Cincinnati. No, I'm kidding. But everything is just as good as I remember it. It's been a great 2 days so far.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna get to a little bit. Well, actually, basically, this episode is going to be quite a bit about what you have been up to down there, who you've been speaking to, what you've been seeing. Given that the offseason is now pretty much in full swing for the Cincinnati Bengals, the coaching staff is on hand as they are coaching one of the squads at the Senior Bowl and getting an up-close and personal look at many of the prospects at the Senior Bowl. And I'm sure there's you've seen and heard some very interesting things. For those of you who have not yet listened to it, John and good friend Joe Goodberry were both on hand to interview Bengals de facto GM, Duke Tobin. So that is up on all of our channels. I suggest you check out that interview. We're going to break down that interview in just a minute here, as well as who has been impressing, some other sights and sounds from the Senior Bowl from John Sheeran. And we'll talk about all of that. As always, you can get this show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, the Megaphone platform, a lot of different ways you can get the show. So please subscribe there. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. A lot of our content is on there as well. And you can also find Matt Minnick's Chalk Talk videos on our Orange and Black Insider YouTube channel. So be sure to download all of that, subscribe to our channels. We appreciate the support. And if you're able to join us live, please do so on our YouTube channel or through CincyJungle.com's Facebook page. We appreciate the support and all of the interaction. So, John, you and Mr. Goodberry there had a very interesting, and quite honestly, when you said interview, I was thinking, hey, you got 5, maybe 10 minutes with the guy. You guys sat down with him for over 20 minutes, which was freaking awesome. Really in-depth, and as you kind of said before we took the air, a little bit of a different angle of a conversation from what you and Joe had asked Duke compared to maybe the general media questions. Let's kind of start macro, big picture here. What was kind of your overarching, your impression of Duke Tobin, his approach to the interview, his approach to the questions, his answers to some of the questions? Did you walk away going, wow, this is a sharp, impressive guy? Were you a little surprised by some of the answers? Maybe all the above? I don't know. What were you thinking?
Just for starters, for the people who have listened to it, there's a lot of comments about, he didn't let us finish or he was very controlling. Just like the dude barely talks to the media regardless. Like he's kind of as secret as Mike Brown in that regard. So any opportunity that we had to speak to him was an amazing opportunity. And I thank him and Emily Parker, who works with media relations with the Bengals, for setting that up. It was an amazing opportunity. And honestly, if you've ever listened to him talk to the media, you can tell that he's very a drab human being. He's not really open to expanding upon his thoughts. It's almost like, in a sense, Belichick in that way. And our goal was to kind of get him to open up with more, philosophical and conceptual type topics and whatnot. And he did a good job of controlling the room, controlling the conversation, doing what he does best, and that's really controlling the narrative of what he does. But it was still amazing to hear his insights on their overall thoughts and their overall ways of running this thing. So it was an amazing opportunity, and it was about. I wished we got him to open up a little bit more, but he's very controlled and experienced in this type of arena. So any opportunity that we had with him was something that we were always going to take advantage of.
Yeah, look, I mean, he's not going to sit here and say, guys, this is exactly what we're going to do on draft weekend. I mean, that wasn't going to happen. He's not going to tell you who he's going to pick number 1 overall and or if he's going to sit at that pick. I think we have a pretty good idea and a pretty good inkling as to what the Bengals will do, should do, all of that. But he's not going to tip his hand, and it is a little bit of a bluff game to the rest of the league. And that's understandable. I did get a little bit of the vibe of, I don't know. There's kind of a vibe of, uh, this is what I do, guys. This is what I do. You're kind of asking me questions, and this is what I do. This is what I live and breathe, and that kind of came through a little bit in his answers. But like I said, he could have been real terse and talked to you guys for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, something like that. Instead, it was a conversation. And what I thought was very cool about the interview with you two and him is very intimate. It wasn't in a press room type of setting with a bunch of different reporters asking a bunch of different broad questions. It was you guys asking him very poignant draft-centric questions, which I thought was very cool. The one thing I did he happen to talk to you guys at all about, free agency or any plans on that respect? I know obviously this is a draft event and the big deal is the draft with the Cincinnati Bengals, but I was just curious if he had said anything about free agency plans or the like.
We try to avoid, anything that could have been considered tongue in cheek in regards to that, like, why are you guys chief of free agency? Why are you guys right? Like, and we thought about, or we quickly snuffed out the idea of asking about, the medical evaluations, all that stuff. Anything that could have been considered condescending, we weren't going to consider. Like the whole goal in my mind was just to pick his brain on certain topics regarding the draft and regarding player evaluation that I've always believed in. I wanted for him to expand his thoughts on that and see where he stood, whether he agreed or disagreed, or what the overall philosophy of how they did things. And a lot of my questions were in regards to, my general philosophies for team building and player evaluation, and just to see where he kind of stood on that. And again, he controlled a lot of, how, the question was phrased, and he answered in regards to, his overall viewpoints on that. And there were some topics that I wish he could have expanded upon a little bit more, or could have answered my questions a little bit more directly. But again, this guy's good at what he does. And obviously he's very straight minded with his overall, way of thinking. And that's basically kind of how it went.
Yeah. So my, what I was trying to so eloquently say earlier, sarcasm, was that, he kind of came off with an air of, guys, I got this, or
right.
we've got this, when in fact the Bengals haven't got it the past couple of years. They really have had some misses the past couple of years in the draft. But, it sounds like he has a firm grasp on things. Did you come away from that interview feeling like, yeah, he does have this, and even though he's got a small staff working under him, yeah, they have a good pulse on what they're going to do in April and how they evaluate players? Did you feel good about the answers he was giving you on that front?
I came with I came into it, kind of curious if the overall process is going to be different, because they're drafting first overall. They're going to be drafting a franchise quarterback, and because they're going to be dealing with uncertain futures with AJ Green and Andy Dalton, the two franchise faces of the franchise. So with those factors factoring in, I was curious what is, if his persona and if his mindset is going to be a little bit different. But it just feels like he's going with the status quo, and that's basically the direction they're going. It's just another offseason with a lot more special factors factored into it all. So that's really the vibe that I was pretty much getting from it. And you could tell in his answers that this is just another offseason. It's not anything, special or anything, just because of these certain circumstances that are being presented in front of them. It's just, like you said, like they have a process. They're sticking to that. Regardless of their past failures, they're going to learn, they're going to self-evaluate and all that stuff, but nothing has really changed, even with this being a really special offseason in all those regards.
So one thing I thought was very telling, surprising, and kind of points potentially to some foreshadowing going forward here, was that he mentioned that we will always take the more talented player over a need. And basically, in a more eloquent way of saying, we're not going to reach. We're not reaching for players because we specifically need them. You could look at some of the past classes and see some examples of that. People go, where are the linebackers? Where are the offensive linemen? And they held off because they didn't like certain players. As much as others that they ended up taking because they thought the value wasn't there. Do you suspect that maybe even though he said that, you're a 2-14 team, you got to get that quarterback, you got to get offensive line help, you got to get linebacker help. Do you suspect that maybe that may take a little bit more of a back seat and needs will be on more of the forefront? Or do you suspect the best player available is going to still kind of be the main card at play?
Like, he made it very clear that they're always going to be targeting the players that are most highly graded on their board, and how that board is structured is based off of nothing more than just how they play on the field, their overall on field ability. And we got into evaluating certain different traits as the game has evolved, and just how the game is different, and how value of certain players may change based off of where the roster is. So, like, for example, a player could be a 4th round player, but if he himself brings more added value to the current state of the roster, then he can get bumped up over, maybe like a mid 3rd round player. And that, but at the end of the day, he came away saying there has to be a big enough discrepancy to take, a certain player would have to be graded much higher than the other player for need to be, kind of thrown out the window in that sense. So it's always going to be about taking the best players possible, but also you have to, he's not stupid. You do have to factor in need in some regards. And with, how this offseason is going to go with certain decisions they make in free agency, I don't think there's going to be any more urgency to address specific positions of need. And I know people are going to look at, picks like Drew Sample or whatnot, where that can maybe seem hypocritical, but at the end of the day, the evaluation sometimes they're hit or miss. And with Sample right now, it looks like a miss, but I don't think that deviates away from their overall process.
Yeah, one other thing I found pretty interesting, and actually made me feel pretty good about the process. Not that I didn't think they did it before anyway, but one of the things that he mentioned that they do is they go through multiple scenarios in each round and tweak their draft boards, and they do their own mock drafts, it sounds like, that sort of thing. And they kind of plan for scenarios. One of the things, he talked about maybe trading back and being out of the spot that they're currently in. One of the things that I wonder that they plan for, and I guess I'm just kind of thinking out loud rather than maybe asking you a question, but all these specific players that may be traded or dealt for additional draft capital this year, right? Your Andy Dalton, potentially AJ Green if you franchise and trade him. Dre Kirkpatrick's name is floating out there. There are a couple of others. So, I don't know if he touched on or gave you any sort of impression on, maybe they're going to increase their draft capital that way, or he did mention maybe by moving back, picking up additional picks. But I would foresee that the 7 picks that the Bengals have and where they're slotted, I would expect some movement.
No, that's completely fair. Like, we didn't necessarily dive into that because we were kind of expecting the answer that we were going to get, and I was like, we're always going to be looking for the best ways to improve the team and whatnot. And it would have been more so of a cliche answer and not exactly what we were going for. But yeah, like, you just look at the past drafts and the past like 5 or so years. I think they've traded back in the second round in nearly all of them, excluding the Jake Fisher and the Tyler Boyd picks. So that's a trend that you could very well expect to continue because they only have 7 picks. They're not going to get any compensatory picks, and they're going to have a lot of departures in free agency. So they need to find ways to fill this roster out, and because they're so well positioned in this draft, because they're drafting at the top of the round every time. That's a prime spot for teams, in the beginning of the second round, the beginning of the 4th round, where there's a cutoff in the days. Teams are going to be calling all night, for a chance to pick a player that is still really high on their board. So they're going to have multiple opportunities to drop down in this draft class, and that's after they can potentially trade Andy Dalton for a pick or 2, and maybe even a Dre Kirkpatrick. But Duke is always going to be, the guy who says we're going to be looking to put the team in the best position to maximize the roster, and that was the overall impression that we kind of came away with.
Well, a really entertaining interview. I don't know if you've got any other thoughts before we kind of move on to some of the players who have impressed and whatnot. But, very entertaining interview, very in-depth, and attempted to ask some questions that you normally wouldn't hear from other.
He was genuine and thorough, and honestly, that's all I could have hoped for, because for him to do it in the first place. Apparently, he was supposed to be somewhere like 5 minutes after we had finished, and he was like rushing out of the hotel. So for him to take the time to talk to us, who are not officially credentialed media members, it was an amazing experience, and he was genuine and honest, and that's all I could have asked for.
Well, thank you for getting that audio to us, and I think our listeners, if you have not had a chance to listen to it, please do. I think our listeners would very much enjoy that. We may tack that on to the end of this live episode here. As of now, it is its standalone episode on all of our channels, but check that interview out. Very interesting, and not a guy you basically only hear from a couple times a year, right, John? I mean, it's basically at the Senior Bowl, at the Combine, around draft time, maybe around the first, around training camp or so. I mean, he's a little more accessible than the Brown family, but overall, it's really just a handful of times that we get to hear from him, and it's pretty awesome that you guys were able to set that whole thing up. And like you said, I guess thanks to Emily with the Bengals to set that up. That was a neat opportunity. We're talking with John Sheeran, who is in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl, picking up all the sights, sounds, and breaking down the interview that he conducted with Bengals Director of Player Personnel, Duke Tobin. Very interesting stuff. Check it out on all of our channels, as I mentioned. Moving on, John, there are some players who have impressed. There are players who have not. You have been on hand at a couple of different practices. I guess start from the first day you were there and some takeaways from the first practice, and kind of move on to where we're at middle of the week as we creep towards the actual game itself.
So as most people know, I have an affinity for the trenches. So when I come down here, I usually gravitate towards the offense lineman, the defense lineman when they get into the one-on-ones. And for the South, which is the roster the Bengals are dealing with, the first player that really caught my eye was Jabari Zuniga, who's an edge defender out of Florida. And now Jonathan Grenard is the guy that most people should know. He's could potentially be a first-round pick. He was also from Florida, but Jabari just kind of really stood out to me because he's more physically imposing. He's about 6'5", almost 290, 300 pounds. So he fits the mold of that traditional 5 technique, or just that big defensive end that the Bengals have traditionally liked in the past. But the overall quickness in his hands and his hips, and the ability to win around the edge as quickly as he did, that was impressive. And it was even more impressive because the tackles for the South have really impressed me these past couple of days. There was the tackle from St. John's, Ben Barch, who it was a converted tight end from a D3 school, but the athleticism is obviously there, and just the overall hand strength for a former tight end. And now going up against some of these Division I guys, that has really stood out. And also with the South, the offensive tackle from Texas Tech, I believe his name is Terrence Steele. Not only has he impressed,
that's the name right there, Terrence Steele.
Yeah, for sure. And someone who has noticed is Jim Turner, who's been working with this offensive line, and multiple times throughout these past couple of days, he's numerously, called out Steele and praised him for his on-field work. And honestly, Turner has been the most entertaining coach to watch in these practices. He's definitely the most vocal. He's not going to hide his emotions. He's going to be very clear in terms of instructions of what he wants to do. And Steele has been kind of mostly on his good side. Unfortunately, he had a couple of losses today, and that was mainly due to guys like Jabari Zuniga and also Grennan a couple times. But just those tackles have really stood out to me. Also with the South, offensive lineman Tyree Phillips from Mississippi State has kind of given me that Eldon Jenkins vibe. Eldon Jenkins was down here with the Senior Bowl last year with Mississippi State, and the traits are definitely similar. Tree trunks for legs, a great build. I think he's around 330 pounds, but just the overall anchoring ability, the overall ability to absorb power with his hands, like he hasn't lost anything. He's been the one who has been handling Javon Kinlaw, who's the defensive lineman from South Carolina, who's potentially going to be a top 16 pick. He's been the guy that has been handling him the most consistently, and you can just tell why. He's just got immense raw power, and he's just not going to lose to any bull rushers. And his hands are pretty quick as well. So any type of countermeasures that anybody has offered up against him, it just does not work. So those are definitely guys that have stood out for me on the South. And with the North, I got a more in-depth chance to look at those trenches, and the interior offensive line group between Temple Center, what's his name?
Hennessy.
Yeah, his last name's Hennessy, which is definitely a plus. Matt Hennessy from Temple, and he's been working with Jonah Jackson from Ohio State at guard, and also Justin Heron of the guard from Wake Forest. They worked so beautifully together today in cohesion, whether it be zone concepts or power concepts, just mauling guys off the line in those 7-on-7 run drills, and just all three of them handled their one-on-ones extremely well. So definitely a lot of under the radar offensive line talent from both these teams, and this offensive line class is generally viewed pretty talented at the top, and the depth at the bottom has been kind of in question. But the Senior Bowl has definitely given me more positive thoughts on this group than negative.
So before I kind of ask you about a couple of more specific players that both I'm curious about, as well as some of our listeners, but I wanted to ask you about how you've seen the Bengals coaching staff conduct practice. Have they been paying close attention, or especially close attention to any specific position group? Have you seen certain players responding to specific coaches in any certain way, body language, etc.? I don't know. How are you seeing that dynamic work down there?
Well, the offensive line has definitely been the most interesting to watch in terms of how they've reacted to Turner's coaching. And when they go into one-on-ones against the defensive line, Nick Easton, the defensive line coach, has kind of been feeding off of that intensity and overall energy. Just today, when they were going through one-on-ones, there's a mini crowd kind of forming around these drills, because it was just so entertaining to watch, to see Turner kind of interact with these guys. And they're definitely taking it to it, because the Barch and Steele, the two tackles that Turner has praised the most, they've been coming back for extra reps, and they've been just taking to the coaching extremely well. I haven't got to really see much of the skill positions to see how they've interacted with those coaches, but I would definitely think that the offensive line, defensive line groups have responded best to the Bengals coaching so far.
Okay, good to know. Especially with those areas kind of being some of the bigger needs here. So, John, a couple of weeks ago, I told you have an assignment based on one of our listeners' requests, and he is once again requesting in our live chat, Ken Dipple, the Liberty wide receiver Antonio Gandhi-Golden, big guy, and seems to be a height, weight, speed guy. Small school, obviously. Have you been paying any attention to him, seeing anything out of him that's making you say, yeah, this guy's got it? Or I don't know.
Most of the receivers I've seen in the North have been really good. Not just the Liberty guy, but also Michael Pittman has been to a couple of catches. Denzel Mims, has been arguably the most impressive receiver I've seen for the North. But the North in general, like the Lions are not really throwing the ball that much. So it's been kind of a rare opportunity to see these guys win in one-on-one situations. But when their quarterbacks are, Jordan Love and Shea Patterson, I kind of understand that to an extent. But yeah, like the Liberty, I can't even remember his name. Gilman, I guess, is his name. Gandhi Golden.
Yeah,
Gandhi Golden. Wow, I need to start remembering that. No, he's been impressive. Impressive at the catch point. Impressive tracking deep balls, over his shoulder. But definitely, I think the guy stood out to me the most is Mims. And there's also a tight end from the South team as well, from LSU, Stephen Sullivan, who was working in conjunction with Thaddeus Moss, who had a good game in the national championship. He's been the guy that, just watching the receivers in general, has created the most separation. It's just been the most athletically gifted, and no one in terms of the South defense has been able to keep up with him in terms of his route running, his overall receiving ability. So there's definitely some intriguing receiving options. I know your guy Michael Pittman, you want to talk about as well. He's been doing pretty good as well. It's just been easier to, I think, evaluate some of the South guys, because they've just had more opportunities in the Bengals practices.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just a little bit more on Pittman, I guess. I saw on Twitter, I think it was maybe from Joe Marino of the Draft Network, or somebody had said that, he's been really dominant and playing well in practices. Obviously, we have to see that translate in the Senior Bowl and then into the pros. But it sounds like he's had a good week of practice so far. Another one of those height, weight, speed guys. Last year, when we did a preview of him, John, on one of our prospect watch lists, in one of our previous episodes, and I noted that Pittman had some good statistics this year, had the high touchdown volume last year, despite some quarterback change, be it injury or other issues over the past couple of seasons. So maybe a little stability will do him good, but good to hear that he's doing pretty well. And if you have any additional insight on him or observations on him, I'd love to hear it.
Again, like I saw most of his work on day one when they were going through one-on-ones, and he had a couple of good opportunities on some go routes to win over the top, and he hauled it in. So yeah, I being 6'3", 220, he's got an incredible build and incredible speed to go with that, and he's had the opportunities in some of these drills to take advantage of the North cornerbacks. So he's had himself a good week. It'll be interesting to see how that carries over to tomorrow's practice into the game.
So I would be remiss if I did not ask you about a particular young man that is probably one of the scariest prospects for the Cincinnati Bengals, in that he may be a guy that the team looks at potentially for.
We're really doing this?
Yeah, well, no, we're not. But I do want to talk about Justin Herbert. For some reason, PFF is saying he's the highest graded guy, offensive player in practice. I don't know what that tells you. But before we get to your observations, I do want to play an audio clip that you posted on your Twitter account, an interview with Justin Herbert, the Oregon quarterback, brief interview, asking him about being a scheme-diverse guy.
Yeah, it's studying a lot of offenses, going through the process 3 different times, and learning new plays, how to study best, how to learn best, and so coming here that we've had an advantage of learning the plays.
So basically, he's kind of talking about working under the Cincinnati Bengals staff and the fact that he's really had a number of different offensive coordinators, coaches at Oregon, and maybe that makes him well-versed, and I guess maybe even a bit more adaptable than some of the other quarterbacks. That could be up to debate. Bottom line, I guess what I'm asking is, how has Herbert looked? He is the most talented guy that is in Mobile this weekend, I would venture to guess. So your thoughts on him, how he has looked in practice, Mr. PFF all-practice team, Justin Herbert.
Well, I wouldn't say he's the most talented. I think that has to go to Javon Kinlaw, but in terms of quarterbacks down there, he's definitely been more noticeable. He's been more noticeable than Jalen Hurts and Montez Stevens or whatever. Steven Montez from Colorado, excuse me. No, he's been good. Like you can tell that he's just a natural, just throwing on the run and in person when they're going through these 7-on-7 and 11-on-11 drills, when there are a lot of play action rollouts in the install that the Bengals offense is implementing, and he's finding guys getting open on these second level reads and whatnot, and the balls are coming out accurate. So he's done nothing but really help himself. He's been great at interviews, just not only the ones that I was a part of, but also during media day, he was answering questions very personable and very maturely and all that stuff. So he's done nothing but help himself. And I think there's a lot of buzz right now about Jordan Love, climbing into the top half of the first round, and that kind of leaves Herbert in this kind of, this I don't know if a very ambiguous draft stock right now for Herbert. It just depends on what really happens in free agency with all these teams that need quarterbacks, and that could really adjust and fluctuate his overall stock. So right now, the Senior Bowl is kind of hit or miss with some of these quarterbacks, but he's done nothing but help himself so far.
Okay. I don't know if you've really talked about this, but has anybody really stood out in a negative way? Some guys that you had your eye on and had some high hopes for going into this weekend, and maybe they've fallen a little short.
A couple offensive linemen have not looked particularly good. John Simpson from Clemson, unfortunately, does not look like a guy. He's been a guy that Turner has consistently scolded at because he's just not handling. He's not his own blocker, and these drills are just not really his forte. He's had a lot of bad matchups with not only Kinlaw but also Robert Windsor, who's a defensive lineman from Penn State. He's been wrecking things consistently along the interior. Windsor? But yeah, so there's a couple of offensive linemen that are just not really fits for what the Bengals are looking for, and that's fine. This is an arena that really separates, the athleticism and the raw power of some of these guys. But again, there's not much that we've really seen that can determine if these guys, just aren't really fits or whatnot, because the practices for the most part have been kind of limited and almost in some ways unconventional, specifically with the Lions, who are doing doing a lot of run blocking drills with these wide receivers and not really letting the quarterbacks show off their talents to these receivers. So it's been kind of an interesting couple sets of practices for the Lions. The Bengals are basically doing what they do in training camp, and it hasn't been anything surprising to me. It just looks like a typical Bengals practice out there, but there hasn't been a lot of, I guess, what you call disappointing performances. There have been a couple of players that I've been meaning to, watch him more in depth because I knew their names going in, but I really haven't got the chance to go over that because I've been so encapsulated with some of these guys in the trenches. But for the most part, it's been a lot of fun to watch. Like Lloyd Cushenberry has impressed me more than I thought he would. He measured in like a mammoth, and he just glides so easily on some of these zone concepts. So he's definitely a guy I think has raised his draft stock. And again, it's just been a lot of, it's been good to not know a lot of these guys coming in to get some organic general impressions, because I don't think that these rosters are as talented as the last two that I've been accustomed to. And it's definitely a lot less names that I know. So just seeing these guys perform, either good or bad, I think is good from an evaluation standpoint, just to get more organic impressions. And that can leave a more lasting and more accurate impact on how we view them going forward.
If you don't mind, John, before we get out of here, by the way, we're cutting this episode a little short because we want our good friend John to have a little fun out there in Mobile for the rest of the evening. But he also did an extensive amount of work this week, and we have that long interview with Duke Tobin. So we're gonna cut the episode a little short. But before we get out of here, we've got a couple minutes, John. If you are okay with it, we've got a couple of people asking about some specific players. Put you on the spot a little bit. If you don't have anything on them, don't feel bad. It's just a little rapid fire. Terrell Lewis, Keith Brewer in the live YouTube chat is asking about Terrell Lewis. He said, are they practicing Terrell Lewis at strong side linebacker? Lapham mentioned it. I don't know if you have any info on that.
But both Alabama edge rushers have looked really good for the South team. Like they've been some of the guys that have consistently won against these tackles, and Lewis is no exception. Just the push and pull rip moves from him have been fun to watch. And like Alabama guys usually do well in these kind of arenas because they're so well coached and they're so physically gifted and whatnot. So Lewis has not been an exception to that rule.
Akeem Gaither, anything on him? So that was a name that popped up.
I've heard about him. I saw a little bit more of him on the first day than I did the second day, but I haven't seen a lot of the linebackers. But he looks like a natural athlete, and I think that's definitely important to see because if coming from Appalachian State and just anybody who comes from a small school, how they match up athletically in space against more natural athletes who went on to bigger schools, I think is important. And I think that he's shown that he has enough athleticism. I haven't seen him a lot in terms of from a physicality standpoint. I haven't seen him really match up as a pass rusher or in run defense or whatnot, but just in the spare moments I've seen him in space, he's looked pretty good there.
University of Florida wide receiver Van Jefferson, anything on him?
Oh, he's been one of, if not the best receivers down here. Today he made a couple of Moss moments. I think unfortunately one was out of bounds, but he created a lot of separation on a lot of deep balls on day one. And yeah, he's been really good. And he was a guy that I kind of knew coming into this, but I didn't really know what exactly his skill set was. But he definitely looks like a more natural deep threat than I definitely expected, especially with these quarterbacks and how inconsistent they can be.
Logan Stenberg from, I think, he's a University of Kentucky guard. Did you mention him?
Oh yeah, he's another guy that Turner does not like. He just doesn't play with any leverage, and it's tough for him. And like his grip strength is kind of there, but he just exposes his chest and way too much, and he just loses at the point of attack a lot. Unfortunately, Kentucky doesn't. They're just not the best school for developing offensive line talent, and he looks a lot like John Toth did a couple of years ago. Just a guy that has power to him, but he's just going to get bull rushed consistently in the NFL unless he gets his pads down. I'm
trying to think. what about I don't know if some of these guys are there or not. I saw something about Eason, but is Eason there?
Eason is not here.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Randy Roberts from Facebook is asking about Colin Johnson. I've only seen like 1 or 2 plays from him, but again, a guy who can separate deep has been pretty good. And he's tall as hell, is Joe Goodberry is telling me in the background. but yeah, he's just a guy that stands out. And a lot of these receivers are extremely talented. And I just gushed over Van Jefferson about a minute ago. But most of these receivers have made a lot of good impressions.
What about Prince Tega Wanogo?
He is
Auburn?
Unfortunately not participating. I think he got flagged medically. Yeah,
he got hurt. That's right. Yeah, I hadn't heard much about him, so I was wondering what the deal was there. I think with Trey Adams, Washington, that was somebody
also
asked
not.
Yeah.
He couldn't go.
Yeah, I hadn't heard anything about him, so I was wondering what the deal was there too. All right. Well, I think that's it, man. I mean, we tried to get to a lot of these, so I think I put you on the spot enough. Is your mind fried? Do you feel like you've just been through the ringer? You should.
Again, like I have windburn on my face. I've got a stomach full of barbecue, and yeah, I need a drink or two right now for sure.
Yeah. What's gonna be the beverage of choice down in Mobile?
Man, I could use a seltzer right now. You know my love for that, and that's honestly feeling pretty good right now.
All right, well, get after it. Is it really cold down there right now?
It was freezing yesterday because of the wind.
Really?
It got a little bit warmer today, but there's supposed to be a storm that's coming in tonight, and unfortunately, it is moving practice to South Alabama's indoor facility, so there'll be limited access for media members there. But we're going to try to get there and try to get some live content for you guys.
Okay, cool. Are you staying through the game?
I'm not. I'm flying home Friday morning.
Okay. Well, keep it coming, man. Appreciate all of the stuff that you got to us, especially that Duke Tobin interview. If you have other interviews that you end up landing along the way, definitely share them with us, and we'll pop them on the channel, man. It's awesome stuff.
Yeah, it's been a blast.
Good. Tell Goodberry back there what's going on, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of your night, the rest of your trip. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. This show has primarily centered around John's trip to Mobile, Alabama, and all the sights, sounds, reactions, and, of course, the Duke Tobin interview that we put on the podcast channel earlier on Wednesday. So check out that interview and get the show how you can. Subscribe to any number of our channels that we offer the program on. And keep it to CincyJungle.com for all your news, opinions, analysis, videos, podcasts, all kinds of good stuff on CincyJungle.com, your source for Bengals news. We will see you next episode. This is a short one. I'm not used to this being so short, John, at least short for us. So enjoy the rest of your trip, man. Fly home safe and go have some fun tonight.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for the work, and thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next episode.